Every great house has a story that precedes it. Dunmore Hall had several. There was the story of the third Earl, who had lost the East Wing in a card game and won it back in a duel. There was the story of the fourth Earl's wife, who had planted the gardens in a fit of grief after losing 3 children, and had never spoken of it, and whose roses still bloomed every June, as though grief could be made to mean something beautiful if you gave it long enough. And there was the story of the current Earl, the 6th, 29 years old, dark-haired, with a face that would have been called handsome by anyone who was not also aware of its expression, which was the story most people told, because it was the most recent, and the most vivid, and the most carefully maintained. The story was this. Lord Cavendish, the Earl of Dunmore, was the cruelest man in England. Not in the theatrical sense, not the cruelty of a villain in a novel who announced itself loudly and wore dark colours and laughed in the wrong moments. It was a quieter cruelty than that, colder, more precise. The cruelty of a man who understood exactly where a person was vulnerable and chose, with the calm deliberateness of a surgeon, to press there. He had dismissed 3 stewards in 6 months. He had reduced a magistrate to silence at a public assembly with 4 sentences. He had ended the engagement of his nearest neighbour's son by sharing, at a dinner party, a piece of information about the young man's finances that was true and therefore irrefutable, and absolutely should not have been shared. He attended social events infrequently and left early. He accepted no invitations. He tolerated no familiarity. He was, by the comprehensive agreement of everyone who had encountered him, a man to be avoided. This was exactly what he intended. What he had not intended, what he had not planned for in the careful construction of the life that kept people at the necessary distance, was Rosalind. But that comes in order. First, the auction. Rosalind Carey had known for some time that her stepfather was not a good man. She had known it with the particular patient clarity of someone who had assembled the evidence over years, not in one dramatic revelation, but in the accumulation of small things, each individually manageable, together forming a portrait that was impossible to mistake. The way he spoke to the servants, the way he spoke about her mother, who had died 4 years ago and whose memory he treated as a resource to be deployed when useful and ignored when not. The way he looked at the ledgers of her father's estate, her real father's estate, the modest but decent inheritance that should by rights have been hers, and that had been, over 5 years of her stepfather's management, quietly and thoroughly consumed. Sir Harold Weston was not a violent man. He was something more difficult to name. A man of appetites, who dressed his appetites as necessities, who had convinced himself, through the flexible logic of the self-interested, that what he did was reasonable, that what he took was owed to him. He had, when he married Rosalind's mother, acquired 2 things: a respectable widow with a modest fortune, and a stepdaughter of 19, who was, he had noted with the assessing quality he brought to all valuations, quite remarkably pretty. Rosalind had been aware of this noting. She had managed it with the careful competence of a young woman who understands that she is in a situation with limited options, and who is therefore very focused on maximizing the options she has. She had been pleasant and distant, and useful and unobtrusive, and she had learned the architecture of Sir Harold's house, where he was at what hours, which rooms were safe, which conversations to avoid, which requests were traps. She had also, very quietly, been saving money. Small amounts, carefully hoarded, from the household accounts she was given to manage, a penny here and there, enough to matter over time. She had a number in mind, a threshold. When she reached it, she had a plan. She had not reached it when Sir Harold made his arrangement with Lord Dunmore. She found out the way she found out most things, by being quiet in a room where she was not expected and listening to a conversation not intended for her. Sir Harold and a man she did not recognize in the study on a Tuesday evening in March. The arrangement was dressed in the language of debt settlement, which was Sir Harold's preferred vocabulary for the things he did. He owed Lord Dunmore a sum that had become, over 2 years of accrued interest, considerably larger than the original amount. He had no means of paying it that did not involve selling something he was reluctant to sell. He had, he told the intermediary, an alternative to propose. The alternative was Rosalind. Not in those words. The words used were more careful. A young woman of good family, respectable, well presented, suitable for the management of a great house. The words suitable doing a great deal of work that the words bought and sold were not allowed to do. Rosalind stood in the corridor outside the study and listened until she had heard enough. Then she went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about the money she had saved and the plans she had made and the threshold she had not yet reached. She thought about Lord Dunmore, whose name she knew, whose reputation she had heard described in the particular careful tones that people used for things they considered too dangerous to say directly. She thought about her mother, who had trusted Sir Harold Weston, and what that trust had cost. She thought, I am not going to let this happen to me the way it happened to her. And then she thought, but I have not yet figured out how to stop it. She had 3 weeks to figure it out. She did not figure it out. Sir Harold brought her to Dunmore Hall on a Wednesday morning in April, in the carriage that still had her mother's initials on the door, and delivered her with the expression of a man settling an account. Lord Dunmore received them in the entrance hall. He was taller than she had expected, darker. The face that would have been handsome was very still, and the eyes, grey, very clear, the colour of river water in winter, looked at her with an expression she had been bracing herself for and did not find. She had been bracing herself for the assessment, the proprietary inventory of a man receiving a purchase. What she found instead was something more complicated and less readable. He looked at her for exactly 3 seconds, and then he looked at Sir Harold, and something in his expression shifted to something considerably colder than what he had shown her. Miss Carey, he said. His voice was even and low, and gave nothing away. My lord, she said. Her voice was equally even. He looked at her again, briefly, as though something had surprised him. Then he turned to Sir Harold and said, in the tone of a man concluding a distasteful transaction, "The debt is settled. You may go." Sir Harold went, and Rosalind Carey was alone in the entrance hall of Dunmore Hall with the cruelest man in England. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I expect," he said, "you have a great deal to say." "I expect," she said, with the calm she had been practicing for 3 weeks, "that I will say most of it when I know more. I find I make better arguments with more information." Something moved in his face. So quickly she almost missed it. "Follow me," he said. She followed him. He showed her the house himself. This was not, she gathered from the expression of the housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Alderton, who had the carefully neutral face of someone who had learned to survive proximity to him by becoming very good at revealing nothing. The usual procedure. The housekeeper showed new arrivals the house. The Earl showed no one anything. He walked through the rooms at a pace that expected her to keep up, which she did, and he described each one with the brisk efficiency of a man delivering a report rather than conducting a tour. The dimensions, the function, the condition of the roof in the east wing, which was a problem being addressed. The library, which was the largest room on the first floor, and which he described last, and with a different quality. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of the brittle efficiency that characterized everything else. She stopped in the library doorway. It was magnificent. Floor to ceiling, 4 walls, a rolling ladder on each side, and the particular quality of a collection that had been built by someone who actually read. The books worn at the spines, some of them flagged with slips of paper, organized in the ordered but personal way of a system that made sense to its creator. "You read," she said. He stopped, turned. "Is that unexpected?" he said, with the edge she had already identified as his default register. "Most people with libraries of this size collect them," she said. "They do not read them. The spines on yours are broken." He looked at her for a moment. "You may use it," he said, "when I am not in it." "Thank you." He turned to continue. She did not move immediately. "My lord," she said. He stopped again, with the slight tension of someone not accustomed to being stopped. "I would like to understand the terms," she said, "of the arrangement. What is expected of me, specifically, and what I may expect in return. I find that clarity is more comfortable than ambiguity, even when the clarity is difficult." He turned fully and looked at her with the expression she was beginning to learn, the one that meant something had registered that he had not anticipated. "You are here as mistress of the house," he said. "You will manage the household accounts and the staff and the domestic arrangements. You will be present at such social occasions as I am obliged to attend. Beyond that," he paused, "I have no interest in performing a marriage that is not one. My rooms are in the north wing. Yours will be in the south. The arrangement between us is practical, and nothing further unless you choose otherwise." She absorbed this. "I will not choose otherwise," she said, "on the basis of 3 minutes acquaintance. I am not suggesting you should. I am simply establishing that the choice, if it exists, is mine." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "it is." She nodded once. "Then we understand each other. Thank you for the tour." She walked into the library. She heard him pause in the doorway for a moment. She could feel it, the particular quality of a presence that had not yet moved. And then his footsteps continued down the corridor. She stood in the library and breathed. She thought, "This is not what I expected." She was not sure yet whether that was better or worse. She picked up the nearest book, a volume of natural philosophy that had a slip of paper halfway through and the word "wrong" written in the margin in decisive handwriting, and sat down in the chair by the window and read. She was still there 3 hours later when Mrs. Alderton appeared to show her to her rooms. "You found the library," Mrs. Alderton said, with the carefully neutral expression that was, Rosalind was beginning to suspect, her version of warmth. "Yes," Rosalind said. "Someone has written wrong in the margins." "His lordship," Mrs. Alderton said. "He writes in all of them." Rosalind looked at the book in her hands, at the word "wrong" in decisive handwriting. "Does he?" she said. "He does," said Mrs. Alderton. And something shifted very slightly in how Rosalind was thinking about the next chapter of her life. She spent the first week learning the house. Not the rooms, she had those from the tour, the efficient geography of a large Northumberland manor arranged around a central hall and 2 wings, and grounds that were well maintained in the functional sense and somewhat neglected in the ornamental sense. The gardens having been allowed to run along their own logic for what appeared to be several years. She learned the people. Mrs. Alderton, who had been housekeeper for 11 years, and whose careful neutrality was, Rosalind discovered, a form of profound loyalty. She had stayed through the shift in Lord Dunmore's reputation, through the dismissed stewards and the reduced social calendar, and the general withdrawal from the world. And she had stayed because she knew something that the world did not, which was that the house under his management was fair, and the staff were treated well, and the wages were paid on time, and the difficult history that had made him what he was not hers to share. Thomas, the head groom, who had been with the family since before the current Earl, and who spoke of the previous one, the Earl's father, with a careful absence of detail that told Rosalind more than detail would have. Agnes, the youngest housemaid, who was 17 and frightened of Lord Dunmore in the way that young people were frightened of things they had been told to be frightened of, and who relaxed visibly when Rosalind sat with her in the kitchen on the second day, and helped her with the mending and talked about nothing in particular. She learned the rhythms. When he was in the library, mornings, after breakfast, reliably, for 2 hours. When he rode, afternoons, regardless of weather, alone, returning an hour before dinner. When he was in the estate office, which was where the actual work of managing a large property happened, and which he did, she noted with the eye of someone who had watched Sir Harold manage her father's estate badly for 5 years, with genuine competence. She also learned by the end of the first week that the reputation was not the whole story. It was real. She had seen it. He had a sharpness that could be used as a weapon, and had been used as one. The 3 dismissed stewards, she gathered from careful conversations with Mrs. Alderton, had each been dismissed for specific and documentable failures. Dishonesty in one case, negligence in another, genuine incompetence in the third. The magistrate at the public assembly had been in the process of making a ruling that was unjust, and Lord Dunmore had said so, in public, with the precision of a man who had the knowledge to be irrefutable. The engagement he had ended. This one she turned over more carefully. The young man's financial irregularities had, she learned eventually, involved debts to tenants on his family's estate who had gone unpaid for 2 years. Lord Dunmore had known because 2 of those tenants were on the edge of his own land and had come to him when they had nowhere else to go. This did not make him kind. It made him something more complicated than the story said. She filed this. She kept filing things. On the 8th day, she found him in the library. She had not known he was there. She had come in the afternoon, which was not his usual time, and she stopped in the doorway when she saw him. He was at the desk by the far window, reading, with the focused inattention of someone who has forgotten the room around them. He had his coat off, which she had not seen before, and his sleeves turned back, and there was something in the unguarded quality of his posture, the absence of the careful, managed stillness he wore in company, that was entirely different from the man she had been cataloguing. He looked up. She did not retreat. "I can come back," she said. "The library is yours to use," he said. "I told you that." "I know. I'm asking whether you would prefer the quiet." He looked at her for a moment. "Do you intend to be quiet?" "That depends on what you're reading." He held up the book, Natural Philosophy, a different volume from the one she had found in the first day, but the same subject. "I have an opinion about that author," she said. "I expect you do," he said, without the edge this time, with something that was almost wry. She came in. She sat in the chair by the other window. She read her own book. He read his. After 20 minutes, she said, "He is wrong about the 3rd chapter." "I know," he said, without looking up. "I wrote wrong in the margin." "You write wrong quite often." "I am frequently correct about wrongness." She looked at him across the library. He was still reading, but the corner of his mouth had done something that was not quite a smile and not quite not one. She looked back at her book. She thought, there is a person in there. She thought, I am going to find out who he is. She thought this with the warm, principled certainty of someone who has decided on a course of action not because it is safe or strategic, but because it is simply right. She was not afraid of him. She was not sure he understood that yet. He was about to understand it. She was kind to his people. This was not a strategy. Rosalind Carey was not a strategic person in the way of someone who deployed warmth as a tool. She was warm in the way that was simply her nature, the way that some people are tall or left-handed, a quality so fundamental that its absence would have been a different person entirely. She sat with Agnes in the kitchen. She learned the names of the tenants on the estate visits she began accompanying Mrs. Alderton on in the 2nd week, learned them properly, not as a category, but as people, with their specific circumstances and their specific difficulties, and the specific things she could do to help that were within her power to do. She found that her power was, as mistress of the house, considerable. The household accounts had been managed adequately before her arrival, competently, without warmth, with the efficiency of someone for whom the accounts were an obligation rather than an opportunity. She found the places where small adjustments made large differences. The tenants who needed firewood through the winter that they had been too proud to request. The estate school, a small, underfunded room attached to the village church, that needed materials so basic she was surprised they had not been provided. She provided them. She did not tell Lord Dunmore. These were within her authority as mistress of the house, and she did not require his permission, and she had the instinct that telling him would create a conversation she was not yet ready to have. He found out anyway. He found out because he rode through the village on a Thursday afternoon and stopped at the church. He stopped there occasionally, she would learn, for reasons he did not explain, and saw the school through the window, saw the new materials, saw the children using them, saw the teacher, a young woman named Miss Poole, who stopped him in the doorway with the slightly anxious manner of someone who was not sure whether she was about to be thanked or reprimanded, and said, "Lady Dunmore arranged it." He came home. He found Rosalind in the library. She looked up when he came in and saw something in his face that she did not yet have a name for. "The school," he said. "Yes," she said. "You did that?" "Yes." He stood in the doorway. She waited. She had learned that he processed things in silences, and that the silences were not hostile. They were simply his way of arriving at what he actually meant to say, rather than what came first. The previous steward noted it as a low priority, he said finally, 3 times. "It is the highest priority," she said. 12 children are learning to read in that room. That is not a low priority. He looked at her. "No," he said quietly, "it is not." He came into the library. He sat in the chair across from hers. He picked up his book. They read. After a while he said, without looking up, "The Eastfield tenants, the Hargrove family. They have been short on firewood." "I know," she said. "I arranged for more last Tuesday." A pause. "You knew before I mentioned it," he said. "I visited the week before last." Another pause. "Mrs. Alderton," he said, "has been housekeeper here for 11 years. In 11 years, no one has visited the Eastfield tenants on their own initiative. I find it is generally better to know things directly," she said. "Reports summarize, people do not." He looked at her over the edge of his book. She looked back at him. He looked down. But she saw it this time clearly. The thing that moved across his face when she said something that reached him. It was not irritation. It was not the managed blankness. It was something raw and very briefly visible, like a room seen through a door that opened and closed in an instant. It was, she thought, the look of a person being seen. She did not say anything about it. She understood with the instinctive wisdom of someone who has spent years reading rooms and people, that naming it would close the door. She looked back at her book and she thought, "He is in there. I knew it. I am going to be very patient." She found out about his father from Mrs. Alderton in the kitchen on a rainy May afternoon. She had not been asking about it specifically. They had been talking about the house, its history, its previous inhabitants, and Mrs. Alderton had spoken of the fifth Earl with the particular care of someone choosing every word. Brilliant man. Difficult man. A man who had believed that hardness was the highest virtue and who had raised his son accordingly. He was not cruel to the boy in the ways that Mark, Mrs. Alderton said carefully. Not that. But there are ways of shaping a person that are harder to see and harder to heal. The expectation that feeling anything was weakness. The requirement that he be, she paused, impenetrable. Always impenetrable. Rosalind was quiet. "The young master was not like that when he was young," Mrs. Alderton said. He felt things. Too much, perhaps, the way some people do. He was close to his mother. When she died, she stopped. He was 12, and his father told him that grief was self-indulgence, and that men did not grieve, and that the appropriate response to loss was to continue. "He continued," Rosalind said. "He did," Mrs. Alderton said. "He continues still. That is what you see when people call him cruel. They see the continuing." She also found out about the engagement, not from Mrs. Alderton, from Thomas, the head groom, on a morning when she was learning the horses and he was more talkative than usual. 7 years ago, a woman named Miss Margaret Forsyth, whom the young Lord Dunmore, not yet Earl, his father still living, had loved in the full, unguarded way of someone who had not yet learned to be careful, who had believed that the rules his father had taught him did not apply here, in this specific place, with this specific person. Miss Forsyth had ended the engagement, not because she did not love him. Thomas was clear about this in the careful, loyal way of a man who had watched it happen and had his own accounting of it. She had ended it because his father had made it impossible, had made her understand in a private conversation she had never described to anyone that the match was unacceptable, and that his son would be made to understand this, and that she should draw her own conclusions. She had drawn them. She had married someone else within the year. Lord Dunmore had received the letter ending the engagement on a Tuesday. He had continued with his day. He had not, as far as Thomas knew, spoken of it since. "And then his father died," Thomas said, "and he was the Earl. And somewhere in those 2 years, the engagement and the father, the young man stopped." He paused. "Not entirely. He is still in there. But he built the thing around himself that keeps people away, and he is very good at keeping it built." Rosalind brushed the mare's flank in silence. She thought, a boy who felt too much, taught that feeling was weakness. A young man who loved fully and was punished for it. An earl who built a wall and called it a reputation. She thought, I know something about surviving by becoming smaller. She thought, the difference between us is that he made himself frightening, and I made myself quiet. The purpose was the same: keep people at a distance, stay intact. She thought, he has been alone in there for 7 years. She did not feel sorry for him in the diminishing way of pity. She felt something more active than that, something that was recognition, and the specific kind of anger that comes from recognizing something unjust. It was not fair, what had been done to him. She walked back to the house. She went to the library. He was not there. She sat in her chair and picked up her book and looked at the word wrong in the margin of a volume on the shelf across from her, and thought about a 12-year-old boy told that grief was self-indulgence. She thought, I am going to be very, very patient. And she thought, but I am not going to be only patient. She asked him about his mother on a Thursday evening in June. They had developed by June an evening habit, dinner followed by the library, 2 chairs by the fire as the Northumberland evenings cooled, books or conversation or the comfortable combination of both that had become the texture of their time together. It had happened without being arranged. It had simply begun. The first dinner at which they had talked properly rather than in the managed, courteous silence of the early weeks. The second dinner at which the talking had been easier. By the third week, it had become the thing the day moved toward, for both of them, though neither had said so. She asked about his mother the way she asked all her direct questions, without preamble, at a moment when the conversation had reached a point where it felt natural, which was the kind of naturalness that she had created carefully because she understood that some doors needed the right approach. Mrs. Alderton mentioned your mother, she said, that you were close to her. He was very still. Yes, he said. What was she like? A pause, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, she was... He stopped. She laughed easily. That is the thing I remember most. She found things funny that my father did not find funny, which was most things, and she did not pretend not to find them funny for his sake. Another pause. She played the piano badly and with great conviction. She kept a garden that was not elegant but was extraordinary. She planted things in the wrong places, and they grew anyway because she wanted them to. Rosalind looked at the fire. She sounds wonderful, she said. She was, he said, simply, without the guard he usually kept on things that mattered. How old were you? 12. I was 16, she said, when I lost my mother. I thought 12 was the worst age for it, old enough to understand everything, too young to have anything to hold on to. He looked at her. Your mother, he said carefully, she married Weston after your father died. Yes. How long after? 2 years. She looked at the fire. She was lonely. She did not make good decisions when she was lonely. I understood it. I could not be angry at her for it. She was doing the best she could. And Weston? Was not the best she deserved, she said. But she believed he was, and that was its own kind of sad. He was quiet for a moment. The arrangement he made, he said. With me. He paused. I want you to know that I was not... He stopped, started again. I agreed to the settlement of the debt in that form because my man of business presented it as a straightforward arrangement, and I did not inquire sufficiently into the specifics. He met her eyes. If I had understood what it meant for you specifically, what it cost you, I would not have agreed to it in that form. She looked at him steadily. I know, she said. How do you know? Because I have been paying attention for 2 months, she said. And you are not the man the story describes. You are... She paused, choosing carefully. A man who built a story to keep people away. The story is real in its way, but it is not the whole of you. The fire settled. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the managed blankness, not the brief, quickly closed door. Something more open than either. Something that had, behind it, the look of a person who has been in a room for a very long time and has just heard a key in the lock. Rosalind, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She felt it land. Yes, she said. I have been... He stopped, looked at the fire. I have been trying to determine what to do with the fact that you are not afraid of me. I know, she said. I noticed. Most people are afraid of me. I arranged things so that they would be. It was easier. Easier than what? He was quiet for a long moment. Easier, he said finally, than being someone they could leave. The room was very still. Marcus, she said. His given name, which she had known but had not used until now, because some names needed to be earned. He looked at her. I am not going to leave, she said. Not because I have nowhere to go, though that is also true. Because... She paused. Because I have been paying attention, and what I have found is worth staying for. He looked at her for a long, unguarded moment. Then he said, with the rough, careful quality of a man handling something he is afraid to break, I do not know how to be someone who lets people in. I know, she said. I have noticed that too. She looked at him with the warm, clear certainty that was her particular kind of courage. You have been doing it anyway. You may not have noticed. He looked at the fire. I have noticed, he said quietly. Good, she said. She picked up her book. He picked up his. And the fire burned down, and the Northumberland evening settled around the house. And inside the library, 2 people sat in the warmth of something that was, very carefully, becoming real. The world outside Dunmore Hall had not stopped having opinions. The marriage, such as it was, the arrangement that Sir Harold Weston had brokered and Lord Dunmore had accepted and Rosalind had survived into, had been noted and discussed in the surrounding county with the efficiency of a community that considered other people's arrangements its own business. The consensus initially had been sympathy for the girl. She was, by most accounts, pleasant and well presented, and entirely unsuited to the situation she had been placed in. The Earl of Dunmore was, well, the Earl of Dunmore. And whatever Sir Harold Weston had received in exchange for the arrangement, it was more than the girl had received, which was a household she had not chosen, and a husband she could not have wanted. This consensus began by July to shift. It shifted because Rosalind had been visiting the tenants and the village and the estate school, and the people she visited talked, and what they said did not match the expected narrative of a young woman suffering under a difficult husband. What they said was, she came and she listened, and she did what she said she would do. What they said was, She asked about the children by name. What they said was, she arranged for the firewood and the school materials and the repair of the Henderson's barn roof that had been noted in the estate accounts as pending for 3 years. What they said was, she seems happy. This last item caused the most consternation, because it was the item that fit least with the established story. Mrs. Pemberton, who was the primary engine of social opinion in the surrounding county, and who had been tracking the situation since the marriage, organized a morning call in July that was attended by 7 women, and that was, in the most diplomatic possible terms, a reconnaissance mission. Rosalind received them. She received them in the drawing room, which she had gradually made livable over the preceding months, not by replacing anything, which was not within her impulse, but by adding things, small ones, the evidence of habitation rather than performance. Books on the side table, flowers from the garden, the same garden that had been running along its own logic for years, and that she had not formally arranged, but had encouraged gently, so that it was still wild at the edges, but blooming. She gave them tea, and talked with the easy, warm attention that she gave everything, and answered questions that were not quite the questions they appeared to be, with answers that were not quite deflections. Mrs. Pemberton left 2 hours later, with the expression of a woman who had gone to confirm one thing and found something else entirely. She said to her companion in the carriage home, "She is not what I expected." Her companion said, "In what way?" Mrs. Pemberton said, "She is content. Not performing contentment, actually content. And he..." She stopped. Her companion said, "And he?" She had seen Lord Dunmore once, briefly, at the end of the call. He had appeared in the doorway of the drawing room for a moment, looked at the assembled company with the expression she knew, and then looked at Rosalind. And the expression had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way she could have described precisely to a third party, but changed. He had asked her quietly if she needed anything. She had said, "No, thank you." He had nodded and gone. That was all. But Mrs. Pemberton had been observing marriages for 40 years. She said to her companion, "He looks at her differently." Her companion said, "Differently from what?" Mrs. Pemberton said, "Differently from the way he has ever looked at anything." The companion considered this. The carriage rolled on. And in the drawing room of Dunmore Hall, Rosalind cleared the tea things herself. She liked doing it herself. It was a habit from before, from the house where she had done everything herself, because there was no one else, and thought about the morning call with the amused, slightly affectionate attention she brought to the rituals of social life. She thought about how the world outside had a story. She thought about how the story was not entirely wrong, but was not the story she was living. She thought about Marcus in the library, looking at her with the open, carefully unguarded quality that had become, in 3 months, one of the things she found most precious. She thought, the world does not need to know yet. She thought, we are still building it. She thought, let us build it quietly, in here, until it is strong enough. Sir Harold Weston appeared at Dunmore Hall on a Monday in August. He arrived without notice, which was either very confident or very foolish. And Rosalind, from the window of the library where she was reading, watched his carriage come up the drive with the particular stillness of someone encountering something they had prepared for and hoped would not arrive. She had known he would come eventually. Men like Sir Harold did not conclude arrangements and disappear. They treated concluded arrangements as the beginning of an ongoing relationship, one in which they retained the right to reappear and renegotiate when circumstances seemed favourable. What circumstances he considered favourable, she could guess. She set down her book. She went to find Marcus. He was in the estate office, which was where he was on Monday mornings, working through the week's accounts with the focused efficiency she had come to know and to find in its quiet competence reassuring. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. He saw her face. "What is it?" he said. "Sir Harold is here," she said. "His carriage just came up the drive." He set down his pen. She watched his face go through something, not the cold, managed stillness of the reputation, but something more immediate. Something that was, she thought, on her behalf. "You don't have to see him," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to. I want to be in the room." She met his eyes. "I want him to see that I am in the room." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. He stood. "Together, then." They received Sir Harold in the drawing room. Sir Harold came in with the confident ease of a man who considers himself welcome and found, in the quality of the room, the two of them side by side, the particular atmosphere of a house that had been inhabited and made comfortable by someone who intended to stay, something that recalibrated him before he had said a word. He said the things he had come to say, regardless. He said them with the language of family feeling that was his specialty, the warmth that was not warmth, the concern that was not concern, the suggestion that he had come to see how his stepdaughter was getting on, which was dressed as love and was actually inventory. He also, toward the end, said something about ongoing obligations, about the nature of the original arrangement and his understanding of certain future considerations, that was not quite a request, but was the architecture of one. Marcus spoke then. He spoke in the quiet, precise voice that Rosalind had heard used twice on people who had overstepped. The voice that was not raised and did not need to be, that carried the cold, irrefutable quality of a man who has the power and the information and the will to use both. He said, "The arrangement is concluded. The debt is settled. There are no ongoing obligations. There will be no further discussions of the terms of this marriage with anyone outside it." He said, Sir Harold Weston had received the settlement he agreed to and was welcome to leave Northumberland. He said, "Rosalind is my wife. What that means in this house is that she is under my protection, entirely, without qualification." He said this last thing looking at Sir Harold with the expression that had, for 8 years, made grown men step back. Sir Harold stepped back. He left within 20 minutes. Rosalind stood in the drawing room after the sound of his carriage had faded and was quiet for a moment. Then she turned. Marcus was watching her with the expression that she had stopped trying to name because it was too many things at once. The open, unguarded quality, and the careful quality, and the thing underneath both that she knew now was real. "Thank you," she said. "He will not come back," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "You called me your wife." "You are my wife." "I know. You said it as though you meant it." He looked at her for a long moment. "I did mean it," he said, very quietly. I have been trying to determine how to say a great many things. I am not..." He stopped. "I am not practiced at this." "I know," she said. "I find I want to be practiced at it," he said. "With you, specifically." She crossed the drawing room. She stood in front of him with the warm, clear courage that was her particular kind of strength. Not the courage that announces itself, not the courage of confrontation, but the courage of the person who simply keeps going toward the thing that matters. "Then practice," she said. He took her hand. He held it with the careful, deliberate quality of a man handling something he does not want to damage and has decided, finally, not to be too afraid to hold. "Rosalind," he said. "Yes," she said, answering the question that was still forming. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since approximately the moment you sat in my library and told me I was wrong about the natural philosophy, and I have been trying to find a way to be someone who could say so without it being the thing that makes you leave." She looked at him steadily. "Marcus," she said. "Yes?" "I am not going to leave." "I know," he said. "I am still learning to believe it." "I know," she said. "I am very patient." "I know you are." "And I love you," she said. "That is also a fact worth having on the record." He looked at her. He breathed. Something in the careful architecture of him, the wall, the reputation, the 8 years of impenetrability, settled. Not collapsed, settled. The way a house settles into its foundations when it has finally found the ground that will hold it. "Good," he said. She did not let go of his hand. He did not let go of hers. The Winter Assembly in December was the first social event Lord Dunmore had attended willingly in 6 years. This was noted. The noting spread through the assembled company with the particular excited speed of a surprise that confirms something people had been beginning to suspect: that the story of the cruelest man in England was, in some important respects, incomplete. He was there because Rosalind had said in October that she would like to go, and he had said, without the careful hesitation she would have expected even 6 months ago, "Then we will go." He stood with her at the edge of the ballroom in the way that she had made her own. The edge was the best position, the one with the best view. And he watched the room with the same expression she had always seen on him, the cool assessment, except that it was different now, in the specific way that a room looks different when you are genuinely comfortable in the person beside you. He was introduced to 3 people he had not previously acknowledged. He was not warm. He was not performing a transformation for the audience. He was simply present, without the careful management of distance, which was its own kind of different. Mrs. Pemberton watched from across the room with the expression of a woman whose intelligence has been confirmed. She said to her companion, "I told you." Her companion said, "You told me he looked at her differently." Mrs. Pemberton said, "And I was right." Lord Aldwych, who was, as always, connected to everything, spoke to Rosalind for 20 minutes about the estate school, which he had heard about through channels that were not entirely clear, but were thoroughly Mrs. Alderton, and said that what she had done there was the kind of thing that should be done everywhere, and that he would like to discuss how. She discussed it with the focused, warm attention she brought to everything. Marcus stood beside her and listened with the expression of a man who is proud of someone and does not see any reason to hide it. Lord Aldwych noticed this. He said to Marcus, quietly, at the edge of the conversation, "Your wife, my lord, is remarkable." Marcus said, "Yes, I know." Lord Aldwych said, "It appears you do." He said this with the tone of a man delivering a verdict he had been considering for some time and had now confirmed. They went home in the carriage through the December dark, and the Northumberland countryside was very still and very cold and very beautiful. And inside the carriage was warm. Rosalind said, "You were not terrible." He said, "Thank you." She said, "That was a compliment." He said, "I know." I am choosing to take it as one." She looked at him in the dark of the carriage and thought about a Wednesday morning in April when she had been delivered to a stranger's house with the expression of a man settling an account, and had stood in the entrance hall and said, "I find I make better arguments with more information." She thought about what had been built since then. She thought the information was good. She thought the argument was worth making. She took his hand in the dark of the carriage. He held it. They rode home. The roses in the garden had been, by any objective measure, doing as they pleased for 8 years. Rosalind decided, in the spring following their first winter together, that she was not going to change this. The roses were magnificent, precisely because they had done as they pleased. They had grown in the wrong directions and flowered in unexpected places and created a garden that was not elegant in the designed sense, but was alive in a way that designed things sometimes were not. She told this to Marcus in the garden on a May morning, explaining why she was not going to have them cut back, and he looked at the roses with the attentive expression he brought to things she said about things she cared about, and said, "You are not going to cut them back?" She said, "No." He said, "They are growing over the east wall." She said, "Yes, they are doing it beautifully." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right." She looked at him. He was looking at the roses with the expression she loved best, the one that meant he was genuinely thinking about something, actually considering it, bringing his full attention to bear on whether she was right. He did this with everything she said. He did not agree automatically, and he did not dismiss automatically. He thought. He said, "You are right about the roses." She said, "I am frequently right." He said, "I know. It is one of the more challenging things about you." She said, "Only one?" He looked at her with the expression that had arrived sometime in the summer and had not left since. The open, specific warmth of a man who has stopped being afraid of what he feels. He said, "The full list would take some time." She said, "We have time." He said, "Yes." They did have time. They had the easy mornings in the library and the estate visits and the evenings by the fire and the long, productive arguments about the natural philosophy author who was wrong about the 3rd chapter, which had expanded over the winter to include several other authors who were wrong about various things, and which Marcus won approximately 1/3 of the time and conceded the other 2/3, with the particular grace of a man who had learned that conceding to someone who is right is not weakness, but accuracy. They had the school, which had grown, 2 teachers now, and a room that was warm in winter and stocked with materials that the children used with the unconscious ease of things that are simply there, as though they had always been there. They had the tenants, who had stopped being surprised to see either of them and had started being surprised when they did not come, which was the shift from duty to belonging that Rosalind had been quietly working toward. They had the winter assembly, which Lord Dunmore attended again in December of the 2nd year, this time without being asked, and at which Mrs. Pemberton declared to anyone within earshot that she had known from the beginning that there was more to the story. There had been letters that year from 3 women in situations that reminded Rosalind of her own, not identical, but similar in the essential shape of them, the shape of a woman with limited options, navigating a world that was not designed for her. She had written back to all 3. In 2 cases, she had done more than write back. She was thinking about what that could become, what it could be made into, with time and intention and the specific resources that were now available to her. She mentioned this to Marcus on an evening in November, and he listened with his full attention and said at the end, "What do you need?" She told him. He arranged it. This was not a surprise. She had learned in a year and a half that this was who he was underneath the wall. A man of genuine competence who, once he had decided to apply that competence on behalf of something that mattered, was very hard to stop. On a May morning in the garden, where the roses were still doing as they pleased, and a new one had been planted by Rosalind in the corner where the east wall caught the most sun, she sat on the bench that had been there since before anyone could remember and looked at the house. Dunmore Hall in spring. The same house it had always been, the same stones, the same proportions, the same long history of the people who had lived and died in it. And also different, inhabited differently, lived in from the inside rather than managed from the outside. Marcus came out of the house and crossed the garden and sat beside her on the bench. They sat in the May morning and looked at the roses. He said, "You were right about the east wall." She said, "I know." He said, "You are frequently right." She said, "I know that too." He said, very quietly, "I was told for a long time that feeling things was weakness." She said, "I know." He said, "I find that it is not." She took his hand. She said, "No, it is not." The roses went on blooming. The house went on standing. And inside it, and in the village, and in the school, and in the letters that were going back and forth to women who needed them, something went on growing that was not in any story anyone had told about that house. Something that was, simply, life. The cruelest man in England had not become a different person. He had become, at last, the person he had always been underneath. And that was better. That was considerably, immeasurably better.